You ever hear of someone being kicked out of their home just because it was too beautiful? Not because they owed rent. Not because they trashed the place, but because someone else wanted to take it, murals and all? Well, this is the story of an old neighbor, an art teacher, who turned her home into a literal fairy tale, only to be betrayed by a greedy family and their spoiled daughter. But she didn't go quietly. She left them with a house so dead inside, it would haunt them forever. If you've ever been underestimated, disrespected, or pushed out by someone who thought they could take what you built, then hit that like button and subscribe our channel. Because this is one of the most quietly savage revenge stories you'll ever hear. Welcome to Revenge Portal. There's a house in my neighborhood that for years people whispered about, not in a bad way. It wasn't haunted. It wasn't abandoned. It wasn't a crime scene. It was legendary. A normal-looking little place on the outside, pre-built facade, faded white siding, a small garden out front, cottage vibes. But inside? Pure magic. Murals from floor to ceiling. Every room told a story. The kitchen had a jungle theme, vines spilling out of the cabinets and monkeys painted peeking from behind the cupboard doors. The living room was a swirling mix of Van Gogh and Starry Night, blues and yellows curling around light fixtures. The hallway was an enchanted forest. Bedrooms became fairy tale dreamscapes. One was a tribute to Peter Pan, another to Alice in Wonderland. And the ceiling of the master bedroom? It was a galaxy. Nebulas. Stars. Entire constellations hand-painted with glow-in-the-dark outlines. It was a house that felt like it had a soul. All thanks to a woman named Margaret. Margaret was in her early 60s when I met her, but she'd lived there since the 1980s. An ex-art teacher. Soft-spoken. Always in overalls or a paint-stained smock. Her voice never rose above a calm hum, but her work? Her work screamed joy, passion, life. She told me once over lemonade in her garden, that when she moved in, the landlord had given her a verbal promise. Make this place your canvas, and someday when the time comes you can buy it. No paper contract. Just a handshake. Old school trust. So Margaret poured her soul into the place. She didn't just live there. She became part of the house, and the house became part of her. She taught painting classes from her living room. Ran a cozy little paint and sip business before that was even trendy. Made custom murals for local businesses. Parents sent their kids to her to learn. Adults went to rediscover forgotten creativity. Everyone knew Margaret as the mural lady. Even me. Years ago, I had a noise complaint from her about my truck. I was a stubborn 20-something then, blaring music late at night. She didn't yell. She just brought me cookies and asked politely if I could give her a little peace in the evenings. She had insomnia, she said, and music made it worse. Her kindness disarmed me. I turned the volume down. From then on, I waved at her every morning. Sometimes she'd slip me a painting tip when she saw me sketching on my porch. But things changed. The landlord died. A quiet, elderly man who never bothered anyone. No will. No formalized agreement. His 3 children inherited the house. They lived out of state. Hadn't visited in years. And they didn't see a magical art house. They saw dollar signs. First came the inspection. 2 men in business casual showed up with clipboards and smartphones. Took pictures. Measured walls. They barely greeted Margaret. She stood there, her paintbrush trembling in her hand, asking them if they were interested in her art. They didn't even answer. Just clicked their pens and kept snapping photos. Then came the letter. 30 days. Vacate the property. No offer to buy. No discussion. No regard for the decades she spent making it a home. The siblings wanted to flip it. Gut it. Modernize it. Sell it to the highest bidder. Margaret was devastated. She tried calling them. Wrote letters. Offered to match market value. Even offered to pay above. She started a GoFundMe to raise the money. The community rallied. We all donated. Local artists held auctions. Parents of her students created a mural-themed fundraiser. People held garage sales. We were determined. But the siblings? They didn't care. They refused every offer. Said they had a vision for the property. Their real estate agent even made a tone-deaf statement about how character wasn't as important as clean lines and neutral tones. They wanted to remove the murals. Paint everything beige. Replace the hardwood with vinyl. Turn Margaret's magical haven into a cookie-cutter Airbnb. And just like that, the eviction date arrived. The day she moved out, the whole block stood outside. Silent. Some of us held flowers. Others held paintbrushes. Margaret walked down the path with her cat in a carrier and a box of sketchbooks. Her eyes were red, but her chin was high. She moved in with her niece across town. Tried to stay positive. But she stopped painting. Said the inspiration was gone. The house, she believed, had taken a piece of her soul with it. But the story wasn't over. Because Margaret's art had touched lives. And art has a strange way of fighting back. It started on a Monday morning. A black SUV rolled up the gravel driveway of the mural house. The sun hadn't even cleared the roofs yet, and most of us were still groggy, clutching coffee mugs and pulling garbage bins to the curb. But Margaret was already in her garden, paint-splattered apron tied around her waist, watering the wildflowers she always said painted themselves in spring. I remember glancing across the street and seeing the man step out first. Tall, corporate-looking. Mid-40s, maybe. He had that quick, calculating glance of someone who wasn't visiting a home. He was surveying an asset. And then the passenger door opened. A girl, maybe 16, stepped out behind him. Long hair, crisp clothes, designer sneakers that never once touched mud. She looked around, unimpressed at first. Until Margaret, ever the neighborly soul, offered her a gentle smile and a cheerful, "Good morning, sweetheart." Then they walked inside. And something changed. I watched the girl's body language as she stepped over the threshold. Her pace slowed. Her head tilted back. Her mouth parted ever so slightly. Awe. She was seeing it for the first time. The starlit ceiling in the foyer, painted to look like you were walking under the Milky Way. The hallway of mirrors and koi fish swimming across the floorboards. The tiny mushroom village tucked under the stairs. Margaret had painted the world children dreamed of, and this girl, raised on Instagram and Pinterest boards, had never seen anything like it. The man said nothing at first. Just took photos. Walked from room to room, tapping notes into a phone. The girl, though, she was touching walls. Tracing lines with her fingers. Snapping selfies in front of the castle kitchen cabinets Margaret had spent 3 months hand-painting. Later that evening, Margaret told me the girl had gasped and said, "This is like my aesthetic." And that was the beginning of the end. The official notice came 5 days later. Folded into a formal envelope, delivered not by mail, but hand-delivered by a suited courier who didn't even make eye contact. It cited excessive modification of property and unauthorized structural changes, all under the vague clause of some homeowner's insurance policy that was conveniently unearthed. Margaret's hands trembled when she read it. She brought it over to my place. Sat on my porch with a thermos of wine and a blank stare. "I don't understand," she whispered. "He said I could make it mine. He promised. I was going to buy it, we were just waiting on paperwork." "But there's nothing in writing?" I asked, hating myself even as I said it. "No," she murmured. "He was old school. We had a handshake. I've been here 34 years, for God's sake." It didn't matter. In court, handshakes meant nothing. Legacy meant nothing. Art meant nothing. Greed, however, that always spoke volumes. The man came back a week later. This time, without his daughter. He brought a clipboard and a contractor. Margaret answered the door with paint still drying on her hands. "You have 60 days, he said, with a tone that barely concealed his smugness. "And please don't add any more murals. They'll need to be removed for appraisal." Margaret's face turned pale. "You want to erase them?" "They're not up to code. We'll be repainting." She didn't cry, not in front of him. But her knees buckled a little, and she leaned on the doorframe as if the house itself was holding her up. "You can't just destroy art," she whispered. "It's not art," he said flatly. "It's clutter." Over the next few weeks, Margaret began packing, not just her things, but her memories. She took photos of every wall, every curve, every corner she had painted. Her friends and former students helped where they could. Local moms brought her dinner. Old students dropped off flowers. Someone even started a petition, but it fizzled under legal technicalities. Still, she kept her composure. Graceful, even in grief. One night, I found her sitting in the living room, the room with the giant Narnia-themed wardrobe she'd built from scratch. She was sipping wine and staring at the lion she'd painted on the far wall. "He was my first," she said softly. "I started with the lion. After my divorce." She laughed, bitterly. "I didn't have anyone back then. No kids. No job. I just had this little rental and a box of leftover paint. I thought if I make the walls beautiful, maybe I won't feel so hollow." And she did. Room by room. Heartbeat by heartbeat. Until hollow turned to whole. 3 weeks before her move-out deadline, the girl returned. This time alone, in an Uber. Margaret opened the door, surprised. "Oh," the girl said, blinking. "I thought you'd be gone by now." Margaret said nothing. "I just wanted to, walk through it again. Take a video. For reference, you know." "For what?" Margaret asked, voice calm but firm. The girl hesitated. "I'm gonna redo my room. In the same style." Margaret looked her over, a child with no sense of what art meant. "You can take a video," she said after a pause. "But only if you listen to the stories behind every wall." The girl agreed. And for the next hour, Margaret walked her through the house, room by room, narrating every heartbreak, every loss, every healing moment that fueled her brush. The koi fish were for her brother, who drowned as a boy. The treehouse ceiling? For the childhood she never had. The hallway of stars was for the students who'd once told her they felt invisible. By the end, the girl was crying. Quietly. Silently. Real tears. "I didn't know," she whispered. "You never asked," Margaret said, and gently closed the door behind her. The eviction went through. Margaret left the mural house one cloudy Thursday morning. The sun refused to come out. The street was still painfully quiet, as if it too was mourning. Her van was filled with boxes, a few canvases, some brushes. The rest, the lion, the galaxies, the treehouse dreams, stayed behind. She didn't look back. Not once. And the house, it felt hollow again. Like a museum after the exhibits have been stolen. Like a soul without its spirit. But that wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. The morning after the eviction, I visited Margaret at my friend's dead-quiet guest house. She sat on the porch, wrapped in a quilt, staring into a daisy pot. No tears, just emptiness. "I can't paint anymore," she whispered. "The house was my canvas. Without it, I don't know what I'm supposed to do." I told her about my friend, let's call him Jake, a local painter and handyman. He'd seen the house months ago, fell in love, and couldn't stop talking about the murals. When he heard she needed help, he offered everything, moving trucks, spray painters, even replacing the facade, if she wanted it gone. I held my breath waiting for resignation. Instead, she closed her eyes and nodded, as if acknowledging the moment had come. "I'll take it," she said quietly. "Let's erase that place." Jake offered her rent-free stay in his guest house for the next 3 months, in exchange for one mural in his living room. He said he wanted a piece of her magic. She agreed. That afternoon, a team began moving her possessions into storage units. One of her former students brought cardboard boxes that smelled like chalk and watercolor sets. A neighbor stepped in with bubble wrap and packing tape. It was heartbreak packaged in familiarity. Margaret walked through the mural house one last time. She touched the lion's mane, traced the koi fin, whispered goodbye to every painted tree. Her eyes glistened, but her voice stayed calm. A final farewell to a lifetime. The next week, the transformation began. Jake brought massive sanders, paint sprayers, drop cloths, respirator masks. It looked like a contraption fair exploded inside that home. I remember the first afternoon like a funeral. The sander was deafening. Each wall's mural, the Gryffindor lion, the enchanted forest, Cinderella's carriage, was ground into colored dust and exposed plaster. It felt like the house was bleeding. Margaret watched from across the street, clutching a thermos of tea. Her lips quivered. She whispered to herself, "Erase me out. Make it blank." We all swallowed hard. Once that paint disappeared, returning wouldn't be an option. By day 3, the walls were dull blotches, bare plaster, pastels, faint shadows. Then came primer, gallons and gallons of Kills sprayed by Jake's powerful sprayer. It coated everything, walls, cabinets, trim, in a clinical white. 2 days later, the infamous Rebecca colors arrived. Dead whites, pale grays over cabinets, dark gray Pergo-style vinyl flooring replacing carpet scraps. The wood paneling lost its grain beneath eggshell modern paint. The effect? A house that looked like it was waiting for death. Even the outlets and switchplates were painted over in shades of despair. When I walked inside, the air felt heavy, sterile, lifeless. The soul was gone. Margaret kept busy. She packed brushes, cleaned canvases, cataloged sketchbooks. But at night, she cried herself to sleep. Jake offered her a deal, help design the mural in his guest house. She accepted. In that tiny living room, she painted again, this time beside the window that let in afternoon sun. She created a botanical wonder, ferns that bent toward the light, dragonflies hovering near flowers, birds perched mid-song. It was beautiful, soft, healing. Talking to her while she painted, I noticed she looked more alive each day. The brush felt therapeutic, like reclaiming a lost part of herself. While the painting continued inside, Jake's horticulturist friend tackled the exterior. Margaret initially hesitated to demolish the cottage facade. She loved that storybook door, the ivy trellises, the whimsical shutters. But she made a deal. He would remove it gently intact, in exchange for landscaping help on the new land she just bought in another state. He did more than agreed. Bulldozers ripped out the shutters, tore off counters, uprooted bushes. Gravel, sand, and an awkward boulder replaced tidy gardens. The structure felt hollow, abandoned, carnivorous, a shell that once housed wonder. One morning, a few weeks later, I passed the house. It was empty, quiet, no art teacher, no laughter, no echoes. A U-Haul was parked outside, but nothing appeared inside. I asked the neighbor across the street. They said they saw the teenage girl move in for a few hours, walked through, immediately turned white, then left with her father. No boxes unloaded, no smiles exchanged. The daughter didn't stay. She didn't want the house once the soul was scratched out. It was like buying a phone without a battery, cool but dead inside. Halfway through painting Jake's mural, Margaret changed. The sorrow softened. Her brush strokes turned confident. Colors vibrant. She was alive again. Her new house, way across state lines, had a studio. She set up easels, filled jars with brushes, built shelves with jelly jars full of paint. Every wall was a story waiting to happen. Her first commission in the new town was a mural of the old house, but whole. Undamaged. Filled with stars. Birds flying free. She titled it The House That Loved Me Back. Throughout the process, community rallied around Margaret. Former students, neighbors, mural fans. People sent postcards, visited her new studio, asked for classes. She reopened her paint and wine evenings. But she didn't paint that old house's murals again. She said, "Some stories are better left in memory. They live between the lines, not on the walls." As for the landlord's family, they got the property, but no buyer. Weeks passed. Realtors visited. But something about the blank, soulless interior made offers vanish. They eventually listed it multiple times. Tenants visited. Offers came half-heartedly. The daughter's dream haunted by empty rooms and gray walls. The real revenge wasn't a confrontation or lawsuit. It was creative reclamation. Margaret erased her past, quite literally, to teach them a lesson: beauty can't be sold if you kill it first. She rebuilt quietly, lovingly, despite loss. And in every brushstroke, her story lived on. The silence in the house was the first thing we noticed after the furniture was gone. Gone were the cozy bookshelves, the patchwork quilt on the rocking chair, the soft tinkling of wind chimes Margaret had once painted with little suns and crescent moons.
Gone was the life.
The magic. Now, the house sat hollow, echoing with every footstep like it was already grieving what it knew was coming. Margaret didn't talk much that week.
But her eyes, they burned.
Not with anger.
With determination.
We started on Monday morning. The skies were oddly gray, a fitting mirror of the mood. Margaret had already packed the final box the night before. A small wooden crate containing old sketchbooks, a chipped mug shaped like a mushroom, and a tiny music box her mother had given her. She handed it to me like it was an urn of ashes. My friend Marcus, the same one who had taken her in, arrived with his pickup truck, a generator, and industrial-grade sanding equipment. He didn't say much either, but he handed her a pair of earplugs and a mask.
It's going to get loud, he warned. And dusty.
Really dusty. Margaret simply nodded, adjusted her bandana, and walked to the first mural, the sunrise in the kitchen. By midweek, every brushstroke she had ever laid was erased.
Not just buffed, annihilated.
Gone were the ceiling constellations in the hallway that used to glow at night with phosphorescent paint. Gone was the secret mural in the guest room, visible only when sunlight hit it just right. A boy climbing a ladder into a sky full of stars, modeled after her late brother. Gone was the enchanted tree she painted over the fireplace, complete with small forest creatures peeking out from behind its roots. A child once said it reminded them of a place where fairies might live.
And maybe they did.
By Thursday evening, the walls were an abstract battlefield of bruised pastel shadows. A massacre of memory. Only faint smudges hinted at what once had been. That's when the primer came out. Marcus wheeled in the sprayer like a soldier deploying chemical weapons. It was massive, industrial, the kind used by professional contractors who flip houses for a living. The nozzle hissed, and in one long sigh, the entire hallway turned sterile. We masked everything: outlets, windows, doorknobs, even the light fixtures. What was once vibrant now vanished under layers of cold, sterile white.
4 passes, Marcus said.
Each coat kills it a little more.
1 pass dulled it. 2 passes buried it.
3 passes sealed it. By the 4th, it was like the murals never existed. The house wasn't just blank, it was scrubbed clean of history, of magic, of Margaret. Friday arrived with buckets of gray. You know the kind, contractor colors. Colors meant to make a place feel neutral. Real estate beige.
Open house chic. Emotionless.
Margaret called them Rebecca colors, after the landlord's daughter. The one who had walked into the cottage and decided it should be hers. The one who didn't understand the sacredness of what she saw.
To her, the home was a Pinterest board.
A trendy backdrop for TikToks and selfies.
An aesthetic. We poured the paint.
Silver ash, cloud mist, pebble shore, modern cement. All names that screamed dull, safe mass appeal. We painted the living room in fog whisper. The kitchen in graystone. The bedroom in urban dusk. Even the wood paneling, once hand-stained and trimmed with tiny carved runes, was suffocated under a synthetic gray coat.
Switch plates. Trim.
Crown molding. Every surface fell. By the end of the day, the house looked like a rental. The kind you'd find on Airbnb, with IKEA furniture and bland inspirational quotes on the wall like, "Live. Laugh. Love." Except now it read more like, "Hide. Forget. Erase." When we were done, we walked through the house one last time. Margaret didn't say a word. She didn't need to. You could see it in her body. The fatigue, yes, but also the quiet pride of someone who had reclaimed something more than just her art. She had burned it down with grace. The landlord's daughter would get the house, sure, but not the soul of it. Not the whispers in the walls. Not the years of stories painted with aching care. All she would inherit was a shell, neat, polished and hollow. A house pretending to be a home. Back at Marcus's place, Margaret began to paint again. Not the same way. Not yet. But it started with a phoenix on the living room wall. Bright reds. Gold wings. Rising through ash. She smiled as she brushed the first stroke. "This time," she whispered, "I paint for me." And for the first time in weeks, the magic returned. Just when everyone thought the story had reached its peak, Margaret delivered what could only be called her masterstroke. If you thought the mural erasure, the repainting and the soul stripping were bad, you haven't seen anything yet. This wasn't just revenge. This was calculated, cold, brilliantly surgical. Let me tell you how Margaret killed the magic from the outside in, and delivered the final blow that nobody saw coming. 4 days after the repainting, the house stood still. A few neighbors walked by, puzzled at the sudden lack of life. The once vibrant windows, previously outlined with hand-painted vines and soft lantern lights, were now bare, dull, like they were blind. The home looked abandoned. No music floated from inside, no wind chimes danced on the porch. Even the birds seemed confused. But Margaret wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Margaret sat one morning on my friend's porch with a notebook and a mug of coffee, her eyes steady on the distance. She had that look, the kind of calm fury only a woman deeply betrayed could hold. "I'm thinking of stripping the house down further," she murmured, eyes narrowed. "You mean like the garden?" my friend asked. "All of it. Everything they loved about it. Every bit of whimsy. Gone." And just like that, she called in the landscaping guy, a friend of a friend, known for doing rock gardens and yard leveling. When he arrived, she walked him through the front yard. It used to be charming, you know the type. An old wheelbarrow filled with daisies, cobblestone paths lined with thyme, a white trellis crawling with sweet pea vines. "I want it gone," she said. "All of it." He blinked. "You mean cleared?" "No," she smiled. "I mean erased. Like it never had character in the first place." He scratched his head. "You want me to make it ugly?" "Not ugly. Neutral. Sterile. Like a hospital lobby had a baby with a desert." He let out a short laugh. "That's a first." "Good," she replied. "How soon can you start?" By the next morning, the roaring of power tools returned. Except this time, it wasn't painting over beauty, it was tearing it out by the roots. The trellis? Ripped from the ground. The cobblestones? Gone. Replaced with gravel. The garden beds were leveled with a bulldozer. A literal bulldozer, grumbling over soft garden soil like a tank-crushing memory. Little ceramic gnomes that had once smiled from under lilac bushes were thrown into a wheelbarrow and dumped behind the garage. The rose bush Margaret had planted years ago, the one that wrapped around the porch post, that bloomed in June and gave the house its signature fragrance, was the last to go. She stood beside the landscaper as he revved up the chainsaw. "You sure about this?" he asked. She nodded once. And just like that, the rose bush screamed, if plants could scream, and fell. Once the clearing was done, he brought in his own vision, and Margaret didn't question it. She gave him full license. That's when the weirdness began. Instead of replanting or sodding, he laid gravel. Thick layers of it. Gray. Lifeless. Dusty. Then came the mulch. Cheap, black mulch in plastic bags. It made the yard look like a vacant lot outside a gas station. But the piece de resistance? A boulder. Yes. A single, awkwardly large boulder, just plopped right in the center of the yard like a forgotten Easter Island statue. Not a decorative one. A jagged, misplaced, weirdly aggressive rock that looked like it had no purpose being there. It stood on the newly graveled yard like a middle finger to anyone who remembered how beautiful the place used to be. When it was all done, Margaret walked the perimeter one last time. She didn't cry. She didn't smile either. She simply said, "Now it's ready." And then, she left. 3 days passed. Then 4. Then, on the 5th day, a convoy of U-Hauls pulled up. 2 trucks, 1 sedan. The neighbors whispered, "They're back." Apparently, the daughter had been out of town, maybe even abroad. Nobody knew. But word was that Rebecca had inherited the house, furniture and all. Except, there was no furniture. There was no warmth. There was nothing. She stepped out of the car, wearing all black, high heels clicking against the cracked driveway. The moment she stepped onto the gravel, her face changed. She scanned the yard, confused, a line forming between her brows. "Where's the garden?" she asked out loud to no one in particular. She turned the key in the front door and opened it. It was said by the neighbor next door that she stepped inside, stood there for maybe 15 seconds, and then turned right back around. She didn't even cross the threshold fully.
Just a few steps in, then out. Her face pale. Eyes wide. Mouth speechless.
She walked to the car without saying a word and sat down. One of the movers approached.
"Ma'am?
Where do you want the couch?" Rebecca looked out the window and whispered something they couldn't hear. They stood there waiting. Eventually, she rolled down the window slightly and said, "Unload it to storage. I'm not staying here."
Then they left. Weeks passed. The house sat empty.
Rebecca never moved in.
No new plants.
No curtains in the windows. Just a dull gray box with a lonely boulder out front. Eventually, a for sale sign went up.
But no buyers came.
The pictures didn't match the listing description. They'd used old images, from before, the charming home with the roses and murals and light. But people who showed up in person saw the truth. They'd stand there in confusion, glance around, and walk away.
The soul was gone.
Margaret didn't just move out. She erased her presence so thoroughly, so completely, that the house itself grieved. It stood like a broken violin, hollow, unstrung, unable to make music anymore. Margaret didn't look back. She stayed in my friend's guest house for a while, painting murals and drinking wine on weekends. Then one day, she found a small cottage 2 towns over. Nothing fancy.
But it had light. It had warmth. And it was hers.
Within a month, it bloomed. Murals on every wall, flowers on every windowsill, a wind chime made of colored glass singing in the breeze.
She called it solace.
You see, sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's not screaming, or lawsuits, or explosions. Sometimes it's erasure. Sometimes you take away everything someone stole, and leave behind a perfect vacuum. And sometimes, the most devastating revenge is simply leaving them with nothing they can use.
Nothing they can claim.
Nothing they can sell or smile at or feel proud of.
Just a hollow shell.
That's what Margaret gave them.
Not fire. Not fury. Just silence. And absence. And it was beautiful.
Now here's where things take a turn.
A turn no one, not even Rebecca, could have predicted.
After the betrayal, the silent tears, the signing of papers and the stripping away of years of life poured into that house, Margaret should have collapsed.
Anyone else might have. But Margaret? She didn't crumble. She evolved.
I still remember the quiet moment she stood in the middle of her empty kitchen. The one she had once painted in warm yellow hues with hand-drawn lavender vines curling around the cupboards, staring at the sunlight filtering in through the frosted glass. Something in her clicked. A friend of mine, Ian, who was also a painter, a true bohemian soul with paint-splattered jeans and fingernails that never seemed free of pigment, offered to help. "Say the word," he said, lighting a clove cigarette. "We'll paint that place back to default and leave nothing but a memory." At first, Margaret shook her head. Her voice was quiet, trembling. "I don't want to erase my work. It hurts."
But then, she paused. And her eyes sharpened, not with grief. With purpose.
"Actually," she said, slowly, "maybe it should hurt."
She agreed.
And that's when the transformation began. She didn't just move out of the house. She took its soul with her. We started packing the essentials first. Furniture, heirlooms, all the original artwork. Each canvas she had painted had been carefully unscrewed from the walls, not a single nail left behind. We loaded them into climate-controlled storage. The house, once vibrant with life and love, began to echo. Ian offered her a place to stay, his own guest house. Rent-free, on one condition. "You paint a mural on my living room wall," he said, half joking. Margaret smiled. "You got it." And just like that, the next chapter began. Every day, we met at the house. Every day, we peeled it back, layer by layer. In just 1 week, we cleared the house. Then came the buffing. If you've never watched an artist destroy their own work, it's a little like witnessing a funeral for color. Ian brought a set of industrial sanders. Big, whirring machines with gritty discs that howled like wounded animals as they scraped paint from plaster.
The first wall we hit,
The living room mural. It was a masterpiece, a full-scale impressionist landscape of Margaret's childhood home in Vermont. A golden field under a blue sky, with sweeping mountains in the distance. We stood in silence for a second.
Then she nodded. "Do it." And we did.
The sander growled, and in moments, the sky was gone. The field turned into smudged pastels.
The mountains dissolved into dust.
We moved through the house, room by room. The hand-painted tulips in the bathroom?
Gone.
The whimsical storybook forest in the guest bedroom?
Pulverized.
The staircase, once a spiraling story of vines and blossoms that climbed all the way to the second floor? Now a gray-brown ghost. You could feel the house grieving, like it knew what it was losing.
Then came the primer.
Gallons upon gallons of it. The air stank of ammonia and death. Ian had a sprayer that could cover an entire wall in 4 passes. We masked every surface, every outlet, switch plate, piece of trim molding, and started spraying.
White. Dead white.
It was like draining blood from a body. And then came the Rebecca colors. Depressing, generic grays.
Muted taupes.
The kind of cheap flipper house palette you'd find in real estate brochures for homes that had been gutted of personality. We painted over hand-carved wood paneling.
We painted doorknobs.
Cabinet handles. Even the floors were stripped and bleached. By the end of it, the house didn't just look blank.
It looked sad.
It looked like an Airbnb nobody wanted to stay in. A place you'd rent on accident, regret immediately, and cancel without asking for your money back. The house that once told a story with every brushstroke, now whispered nothing. Margaret stood outside the house one morning, clutching a thermos of coffee. Her hair was tied up, and her paint-stained hoodie had flecks of primer on the sleeves.
Ian joined her with a clipboard.
"You want to touch the outside?" he asked. "Could just leave it be." She sipped her coffee, looked at the pastel blue cottage facade that had once been the envy of the block, flower boxes, ivy arch, custom window trim, and shook her head.
"No.
That goes too."
So we called Devon.
Devon, the landscaper, was a gentle-looking man with a beard that made him look like a monk, but give him a shovel and 30 minutes and he could terraform a backyard like a goddamn hurricane. She traded him the decorative pavers for labor.
And he went nuclear.
Out came the cute rose bushes. The hydrangeas. The sun-chasing daisies that Margaret had planted with her bare hands the year after her divorce. Out came the picket fence, sawn in half and dumped into the back of a rusted truck. Gone were the vines, the birdhouse, the hanging lanterns.
In their place? Sand.
Gravel.
A boulder.
A single, awkward, lonely boulder. Devon centered it, almost ironically, in front of the living room window. It sat there like a tombstone. When he was done, the house looked like a skeleton. The silence that followed was deafening.
A week passed. Then 2.
Then, one morning, a cloudless Tuesday, a U-Haul appeared. We watched from Ian's driveway, sipping coffee.
The daughter, Rebecca, got out. Tight ponytail. Designer sunglasses.
Clipboards and a phone glued to her hand. She was followed by 2 guys carrying boxes.
She unlocked the door. Walked inside. And then,
we heard nothing.
10 minutes passed. Then 15.
The 2 movers returned to the truck. Rebecca came out last.
She didn't say a word. Didn't make a phone call.
Just stood there, hand on her hip, looking around like a stranger in a nightmare. She left the keys in the lock.
Got in her car. And drove away. We never saw her again.
Margaret didn't stick around for the gossip. The day after Rebecca fled, she finalized her out-of-state property, a modest, sun-drenched house in Oregon with a detached garage. That garage? Now a full-blown art studio. I visited her 6 months later. She had 10 new canvases drying on the walls, another 3 in progress. The backyard was a riot of color: sunflowers, lavender, zinnias.
The walls?
Painted with scenes from her travels.
No HOA. No Rebecca.
No forced family obligations. Just Margaret and magic.
She was home again. This time for real.
Rumors circulated back home. Rebecca had tried to flip the house.
Twice.
But every agent said the same thing: It feels empty. One even called it haunted. Another couple toured it, turned around, and said it gave them bad energy.
They listed it, reduced the price, then delisted it.
We heard from the neighbor that they tried to rent it.
Tenants came and went.
One even painted the living room black. Another tried to grow vines again.
They died within weeks.
It was as if the house refused to love anyone else. Ian's living room?
Now legendary.
The mural Margaret painted? It stretched across 3 walls, a reimagining of her old home, but brighter, freer, bolder.
The colors danced.
The flowers bloomed wildly, untamed.
The sky? Not just blue. Infinite.
Visitors came just to sit and stare.
It wasn't just art.
It was a warning.
You can steal a home,
but you cannot steal its soul. The house that once looked like a fairy tale? Now it looked like a foreclosure. Margaret had taken the magic with her, literally. Every brushstroke, every vision, every inch of life she had infused into that place, stripped, preserved, and rebirthed in her new home. As for Rebecca and her greedy family, they learned the hardest truth of all.
You can win the deed.
You can seize the keys. You can take the walls, the floors, the bricks.
But you cannot take the heart.
You cannot steal the soul of a place shaped by love. And when you try, you'll be left with nothing but a shell. A hollow reminder of what might have been. Not all revenge needs to be loud. Not all payback comes wrapped in rage and fire. Sometimes it's a woman with a quiet smile, holding a paintbrush dipped in primer white. Slowly, methodically, erasing every trace of joy from the thing you thought you owned. It's revenge in silence. A slow, surgical removal of magic. Because when you steal something beautiful, thinking it will become yours, you often forget that the beauty lived in the person who created it.
Not the walls.
Not the bricks.
Not the deed.
And when that person walks away, taking her soul with her, all you're left with
is gray. The house? A hollow shell of its former self.
Margaret took the magic with her. The warmth, the beauty, the soul. Now she paints in peace, miles away from betrayal.
And her family?
They got the house, but lost everything that made it home. If that felt satisfying, like, comment your favorite revenge story, and subscribe.
Because karma?
She always finishes her masterpiece.